What a great time to be a gardener, isn't it? All of a sudden the sun's come out and the blossoms come out with it, and doesn't it look marvellous? This one is a variety called Pink Shell, and it's one of my favourites. And there's a lot more about cherries later on in the programme when Anthony Henn visits the Hillier Arboretum in Hampshire for a veritable feast of blossom. Stephen Lacey has been to Knightshayes in Devon, where he admires the combination of spring flowers and foliage. And we visit a gardener in Stockport who holds one of the national collections of fritillarias. But first, a quick update on my parterre vegetable garden. The sunshine has filled these with enthusiasm too, and they're growing away like mad. In fact, some things, like these radishes, are growing just a little bit too fast, and we simply can't keep up with them. And once they start getting a little bit big like this, they tend to get woody and unusable. So that's a very good reminder that with fast maturing stuff like this, you need to sow once a week or once a fortnight in order to get a succession of really tasty stuff. Things like these lettuces too, for example, are quick maturing. But do bear in mind that they can be sown in between slower maturing stuff like peas and beans for what the professionals would call a catch crop. The spinach is now beginning to encroach into the peas, but that's fine because I want to harvest these now, and if I take the ones on the sides there like that, that will clear the peas, and I'm really looking forward to this first taste of green stuff from the garden. Peas have already started flowering now, and they certainly need support right now. Now, if you've got them in a long row, you can use netting, of course, but in this situation, I would much prefer to use pea sticks. Just find out the height of your peas and make sure that the pea sticks are tall enough. These are Douce Provence, which will grow to just a couple of feet. Now, of course, once those are in, then the cloche has got to come off, but that doesn't matter because they can survive quite happily without it now. And in any case, I want to use it to warm up the next bit of land for the tomatoes and courgettes, which I should be planting next week. Well, just the thought of those is making my mouth water. And to get yours going too, well, last week, Anthony Henn visited the Hillier Arboretum in Hampshire.
The last couple of weeks has seen an eruption of colour in our parks and gardens. Now, dominating the scene and taking centre stage, it's got to be these magnificent flowering cherries. Here at the Hillier Arboretum in Hampshire, they've got acres of land, some beautiful trees, but you don't have to have a big garden to grow them. They come in all sorts of shapes and sizes. In fact, there should be a cherry for any garden situation.
No.
Mike Buffin is the curator. Well, Mike, this one here is absolutely magnificent, isn't it?
Yeah, this is one that was raised by the nursery in the early 1920s, and it's particularly important because it has the Sargent's cherry as one of its parents, so it has quite a compact, tight habit, but also good autumn colour.
And as a shape, it's perfect, really, for the medium-sized garden, certainly, isn't it?
Yeah, you could quite easily use it as a focal point within the garden.
How long would it take to get to this size, then?
Probably about 15 to 20 years. So, as you can see, it's quite quick growing, but it remains quite tight in habit.
People are often reluctant to plant cherries because they're worried about the roots damaging the foundations. How far should you actually plant them from a building?
Well, about 15 to 20 feet away from the house would be ideal. If you're not sure, if you look at the ultimate height of the tree and then use that as a distance away, that'll give you a very good guide.
I must say, Mike, Sargentii has got to be my favourite one.
It's probably one of the best of the flowering cherries.
Yeah, the thing about it is the new growth is that wonderful coppery colour, and the autumn colour. I mean, that is second to none, isn't it?
Yeah, well, it was introduced into this country during the late 18th century, where it was received by Kew Gardens, and it's been widely cultivated since then. This is about 25 years old now, so it's getting fairly large.
And if we wanted to keep them restricted, I know people often prune them in the winter, but that's not a good idea.
It's usually best to prune in the late summer so that the wounds have time to heal over before the winter.
Otherwise, silverleaf will creep in.
And then you've got all kinds of problems.
I must say, Mike, seeing this Sivenzii makes me a little worried because I've planted a lot of these in fairly small gardens, but this obviously is very old.
Yeah, this is a particularly old specimen. It's about 45 years old now, and it was originally planted to commemorate Arthur Ivans, who was a nursery manager here at the gardens. It's a particularly interesting cherry because the flowers are white, blush with pink, but if you look at them from a distance, they do look almost pink in appearance. And it's a wonderful feature in the garden at winter as well, where you can put a bench underneath, some bulbs around the outside. You know, absolutely wonderful.
Creates a whole new theme, doesn't it? If you really don't get on with your neighbours, I think this is the tree to plant, isn't it?
This is, you know, one of the largest specimens of the great white cherry, and there's a particularly interesting story about this because this was believed to be extinct in Japan, and it was found, surprisingly enough, growing in a garden in Sussex.
And as a tree, it's a quite spectacular flower, isn't it?
Well, it's probably what you would normally expect from a Japanese flowering cherry, so quite large, white, blousy-like flowers. So I bet you don't know what this is then.
You're right.
Yes, it's an unusual form of the common sloe, or blackthorn, and it just happens to be a double flowering form, and it's flowering particularly well this year, and a little bit later on, hopefully, we should get some fruit on this.
Very unusual, these flowers, for a sloe. I mean, you'd never believe it, and I'm surprised that they actually produce fruit.
I believe I've seen fruit on this.
I'm sure it's not something else.
No.
The only thing is with these, they flower for a couple of weeks, this particular type. The rest of the year, they do look pretty scruffy, don't they?
Yeah, so a little bit of pruning required in the late summer. It's normally grown as a shrub, but the double flowering form is grown as a small tree for the garden. You'd have to look around to find it. Well, what do you think of this one then, Anthony?
Well, who needs flowers when you've got a trunk like that, Ed? That is brilliant.
That's right, isn't it? And that's the wonderful thing about cherries is you can find a different one for every individual garden location. As you can see from this, the Tibetan cherry, it's got this wonderful smooth back, and that's why people grow it in their gardens. So velvety smooth, copper back that you can see here, ideal for the winter months.
I see behind you, Mike, the roots are coming above the ground level.
This is a fairly common occurrence with cherries, where the roots grow fairly close to the surface because the soil's quite compacted and also quite waterlogged. Somebody hits the roots with a lawnmower and you get suckers and disease get in there.
Yeah, what I often do is actually build up with some soil and plant hardy cyclamens under here to keep these underground.
Or the other thing you could do is just mulch the area, stop people from walking on it.
Good idea. One thing I must do before we go.
It's wonderful, isn't it?
I feel better now.
My own cherries, funnily enough, are all coming out together now, which means that I've got the late flowering varieties at the same time as the early flowering varieties, but of course they'll all be all right at the end of the day. Now, I planted my main crop of strawberries a few weeks ago, and now my daughter tells me that she's getting married in a couple of months' time and she's going to want strawberries. Well, in actual fact, she's not. And come to think of it, I haven't even got a daughter. But if I did have, and she did want strawberries, this is what I'd do. You can buy strawberries like these, mail order. And these plants have been deep frozen, believe it or not. And they are guaranteed to produce fruit within 60 to 70 days' time. Now, they'll arrive like this in a polythene bag. Now, if you can't plant them straight away, put them in the fridge, not the freezer department, but the salad compartment, and plant them as soon as you can. And just before you do, I would stick them in a bucket of water for a couple of hours, just to let those roots really take up some moisture. Now, I've still got some space on my allotment, so I can actually put out a row here, and they're done in exactly the same way that I showed you before, planting them 18 inches apart and dead level with the soil surface. But if you haven't got any room left, you can plant them into pots. Behind his tiny terrace house in Stockport, Kevin Pratt grows over 100 species of fabulous fritillarias. Does that make him some kind of fanatic?
Andy said I'm completely eccentric where fritillarias are concerned. I've been growing them now for sort of 12 years, and it's taken over my life completely. There's no particular species which is beyond me. I really want to get every species. I was really intrigued by the imperials. That's what I like the most, the veinings, the colours on them. There's a beautiful story that goes with the imperials. At a time before Christ, the heads of the imperials were said to be upright. As Christ was crucified, he asked them to bow their heads, but they refused. And after the crucifixion, they flushed red with embarrassment, have had tears in their eyes ever since, and have hung their heads in shame. This one's Fritillaria imperialis lutea. They have these beautiful bright yellow flowers. They're very, very easy to grow outside, but the thing that they must have is a very deep soil. Now they normally will grow in the wild about 2 feet in depth, and if you emulate that in your own gardens by planting them at 2 feet in depth with ample manure, then they will grow and successfully flower every year. And the thing to also remember is that underneath the bulbs they tend to collect moisture, so you need to put a drop of gravel underneath them so that the moisture drains away from them during the summertime, and then no problem, they'll bulk up very quickly. And perhaps the easiest of them all is lutea. There are so many other different forms of fritillarias that'll grow quite happily outside in open garden conditions. Things like a compitella, which will multiply and self-seed all over the place. In fact, the babies often can get involved into other shrubs and start coming up in between other shrubs. And then there's a form called Mikolovskii, which again will grow happily outside as long as it has a moisture-retentive soil during the summertime. It loves a trough or a tub, but also very happy at the front of a border. Well, the species inside the greenhouse are not here to protect them from the frost. Quite the opposite. They need as much frost conditions as they can get to them. They need the very cold conditions outside, but what they need in the greenhouse is a protection from the very moist conditions that we certainly get in Manchester. They need protection from the moisture in the winter time. They need protection from the moisture in the summertime. They need a very dry condition during the summer to bake hard and solid. For example, a species such as Drenovskii, it wants this moisture during early spring, say March, April and May, but from there on it needs to be completely dry. And then you've got a species which is beautiful, Glaucoviridis, which has got a dark green on the outside and a lime green to yellow on the inside. Very tiny, very dwarf species, but again, spring water, not during the winter and during the summertime. Once this is finished flowering, it goes on the top bench of the greenhouse. The doors and windows are allowed to stay open, and it bakes solid. It bakes really, really hard, which is essential for some of these very dwarf growing species. We should be putting fritillaria bulbs in August and September, but unfortunately, many of the fritillaria bulbs don't actually arrive until later on in the year, in November and December. That's often too late for these. The best time to plant them, if it isn't going to be autumn, is going to be spring. Now this can be planted now as long as we dry out the soil to start with. Well, traditionally we would actually water the plant before we put it into the ground. And what I tend to do is dry it out so that the root ball stays together. I'll do the watering afterwards. It doesn't matter the type of soil that we're going to plant it into, whether it's a limey soil or whether it's a peat soil, as long as the soil is well drained for the particular species that we're going to plant. For example, Mikolovskii needs the moisture during the summertime. We must remember the soil it's going into has that moisture. And the other thing to bear in mind, because we've planted it dry, we must give it a good thorough watering in afterwards. Now the thing to bear in mind with fritillarias is they don't really appreciate too much feed put on them. If you overfeed them during the summertime, the plant will rot off very early. I actually don't feed my fritillarias at all, just rainwater. Well, out of the 100 or so species that I grow, this has got a special attraction to me. It's my favourite of all the fritillarias. I love the plum purple flowers and the green veining. I look forward to this coming through every year.
It It really is worthwhile working on your lawn a bit because it makes such a good foreground for the borders. But with borders, of course, you also need a background. And that's what Stephen Lacey has been turning his attention to in Devon.
The trouble is with flowers that emerge early in the year is that often the garden isn't quite ready for them. They look lovely, but the backdrop is of derelict border and shrubs still half asleep. So the answer, I'm sure, is to think of these plants as one part of a partnership and to associate them with other plants that look good at the same time. The garden here at Knightshayes is full of bright ideas. Teaming up plants that flower simultaneously is one way forward. And here a completely different effect's been achieved by having the primroses in a carpet of grape hyacinths. The leaves of these are always nibbled short by voles every year here, actually rather helpfully because grape hyacinths do tend to produce great sheaves of foliage. Just maybe there's a tip here for making them more presentable in our own gardens by shaving them before flowering. And just around the corner, the idea has been carried to far greater heights, with a whole medley of spring-flowering bulbs and perennials woven together. If you've got a spring-flowering shrub in one part of the garden and bulbs and perennials somewhere else, it often makes sense to bring the two together. Here, white-flowered Pyrrhus is set against a sweep of pink erythroniums. This is the Knightshayes strain, derived from Erythronium revolutum, from the cool, peaty conifer forests of Northwest America. But leaves can play a more major part too. They may be the leaves inherited from winter, from evergreen trees and shrubs, or other tints, like this Spigenia delevei, whose leaves take on a sort of liver red colour with the winter cold and carry it on into spring. Here it's wedged between February gold daffodils and this extraordinary Japanese Statuurus, which produces a haze of stiff-stalked catkin-like flowers. The hardy ivy-leafed cyclamen makes very useful mats of leaves, emerging after the flowers in autumn and continuing into the following summer. They might also be leaves from plants that emerge early in the spring, like peonies, which come in reds and tans. Or Bowles' golden grass, which sows itself about in moist shade. Or the green tufts produced now by autumn-flowering colchicums. For me, the most beautiful of the woody plants at this time of year is the Katsura tree, a Knightshayes speciality, here silhouetted against a sheet of naturalised daffodils. Something else you can make use of are the colours of stems. Here, white rubus and dogwoods are used as a backdrop for this rather unusual Scilla messonaica, which at Knightshayes sows itself about with the same enthusiasm as bluebells. Tree trunks can be just as effective. One of my favourites is the paperbark maple. Everything seems to come together in this scene. A whole range of flowering shrubs and bulbs, evergreen and emerging leaves, creating a sort of seasonal honeypot that draws you to it. There's no doubt that it's gardening like this that really shows off every spring plant to its very best advantage.
Well, while Stephen's been concerned with spring flowers, I am already looking ahead to the autumn. And of course, that's gardening all over, isn't it? Always thinking ahead. Now this is the cut flower department of my parterre garden, and if you live in a warmer part of the country, now's an ideal time for planting out chrysanthemums. In colder areas I think I'd leave it for a week or two. Now I've already planted out my spray varieties, and they're the ones of course with several flowers per stem, and they're all planted in much the same way, up against stout canes which are about 90 to 100 centimetres tall, that's 3 to 4 feet depending on the variety, and 45 centimetres, that's 18 inches apart. And don't forget to put the cane caps on the top just to avoid damage to your eyes. Now you may remember that a few weeks ago I planted up some cuttings in these polystyrene fish boxes filled with John Innes potting compost. Now give them a good watering, preferably the night before, which is something that I've done. And to avoid damage to the roots, give the box a good tap, like that, to make a space to get your hand in. And just look at that lovely root system there, beautiful. And when you plant, just bear in mind that chrysanthemums are shallow-rooted plants, so don't get it in too deep. And do bear in mind that this ground has been prepared previously with a bit of compost and some chicken manure fertiliser too. And then you want to start, as you mean to continue, and tie the plant loosely to the cane with some soft string. And of course, as always with plants, that means twice round the cane and once round the plant. Now this one is a new variety and it's a disbud, and that means that you get one large flower per stem. It's a lovely yellow called National Celebration, and it's been specially bred to celebrate the 150th anniversary of the National Chrysanthemum Society. Have a great weekend. Goodbye.